The pilot's voice came through the intercom at 2:47 a.m. Calm, professional, announcing our descent into an airport we'd passed 3 hours ago. Welcome to Verified Whispers. Right now, you're probably thinking about your next flight. The cramped middle seat, the stale air, the crying baby 3 rows back. Normal anxieties, manageable fears. But what you're not thinking about is the real horror of being sealed in a metal tube at 35,000 feet. No exits, no escape routes, no way out, except down. You're trapped with strangers, breathing recycled air, trusting people you've never met to keep you alive. And sometimes, in that pressurized cabin where reality gets thin, something goes wrong in ways that have nothing to do with turbulence or mechanical failure. Tonight, I'm sharing 8 flight experiences that will rewire how you see every detail of air travel. The empty seat that wasn't empty a moment ago. The window that shows the wrong sky. The passenger who exists but isn't on any manifest. The bathroom that traps you in a place you can't be. These aren't stories about crashes or disasters. They're about something worse. The moments when the normal rules stop applying and you realize you're not just flying through air anymore. Before we begin, I need you to do something. And I'm asking this way because most of you will scroll past this video in 3 seconds, unless I give you a reason to stay. Hit that subscribe button right now. Not later, not after the video. Now. Because what you're about to hear will make you want to discuss it, to share it, to confirm you're not the only one who felt that cold recognition. And if you don't subscribe, you'll forget the name of this channel by tomorrow. You'll remember the stories, but you won't remember where you heard them. And when something happens on your next flight, when you feel that wrongness, you'll wish you could come back here. So subscribe. Then settle in. Turn off the lights if you can. And whatever you do, don't think about the fact that right now, there are thousands of flights in the air above you. And on at least one of them, something impossible is happening. Let's begin. I need to tell you about the night I stopped trusting my own eyes. It was a Tuesday red-eye from Denver to Boston, and I'd been working as a flight attendant for 6 years at that point. 6 years of the same safety demonstrations, the same drink orders, the same exhausted passengers trying to sleep in uncomfortable positions. I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. The flight was barely half full, maybe 40% capacity. You know those flights where you can practically hear the hum of the engines because there aren't enough people to fill the silence? That kind of empty. Most of the passengers had spread out, claiming entire rows to themselves, already curled up with blankets and neck pillows before we even pushed back from the gate. I did my initial walkthrough during boarding, making mental notes. Businessman in 7C. College student in 12A with headphones already in, elderly couple in row 23, and the man in 14B. He was unremarkable in every way. Middle-aged, maybe late 40s, wearing a gray business suit that had seen better days, thin-framed glasses, receding hairline, the kind of person you'd pass on the street and forget immediately. He had a leather briefcase tucked under the seat in front of him and was reading a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper. That detail stuck with me because nobody reads physical newspapers on planes anymore. He glanced up when I passed, gave a polite nod, and went back to his reading. We took off on time. The seatbelt sign turned off. I started the beverage service with my colleague working the other aisle. That's when I pulled out my tablet to check the seating chart, making sure I knew who had pre-ordered meals, who needed special assistance, the usual routine. I scrolled to rows 10 through 15, and that's when I saw it. Seat 14B was listed as empty. I stared at the screen, blinked, refreshed it. Still empty. I looked up, craning my neck to see down the aisle. The man was still there, still reading his newspaper, still existing. But according to my tablet, seat 14B was vacant. Had been vacant since boarding closed. I figured it was a glitch. Our system had been acting up lately, losing boarding passes in the database, showing phantom passengers. I made a note to check with the senior attendant and continued with the service. When I reached row 14, I stopped at his row. "Can I get you something to drink?" I asked. He looked up and smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind you give when you've made this flight 100 times and know the routine. "Tomato juice, please." "No ice." I poured it for him. Handed it over. He thanked me. His hand was warm when it briefly touched mine, taking the cup. Real. Solid. Completely. Undeniably present. But when I checked my tablet again, it still showed 14B as empty. I found my senior attendant in the galley. Her name was Patricia, and she'd been flying for 23 years. She'd seen equipment failures, medical emergencies, even an attempted hijacking back in the early 2000s. If anyone would know how to handle a manifest error, it was her. "Patricia," I said quietly, "I need you to look at something." I showed her my tablet, pointing to seat 14B. She frowned, took the tablet from me, and scrolled through the passenger list herself. "System's probably syncing wrong," she muttered. "Did someone get upgraded? Last-minute change? I don't know. But there's someone sitting there." She looked at me with that expression veteran flight attendants get when dealing with newer crew. Patient but slightly condescending. "Show me." We walked up the aisle together. The cabin lights were dim now, most passengers dozing or watching their personal screens. We reached row 14. The man was still there, still reading. Patricia saw him. I saw her see him. She even paused for a second, her eyes registering his presence. Then she looked at me. "Seat's empty," she said. I felt my stomach drop. "What? 14B is empty. Are you feeling okay? Did you get enough sleep before this shift?" "Patricia, he's right there." I pointed directly at him. She looked where I was pointing, looked right at the man in the gray suit. Then she looked back at me with genuine concern. "Honey, there's nobody there. It's an empty seat." The man chose that moment to look up from his newspaper. He made eye contact with me, then with Patricia, then back to me, and he smiled again. That same tired, knowing smile. "I'll be right back," I said to Patricia and walked quickly to the galley. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and went back to row 14. Patricia had moved on, heading toward the cockpit to check in with the pilots. I stood in the aisle and raised my phone, pretending to check something while I angled the camera at seat 14B. The man was looking right at me now, not threatening, just watching, waiting. I took the photo. Then I looked at the screen. In the photograph, seat 14B was empty, just an empty seat with no one in it. I could see the headrest, the seatbelt buckle hanging loose, the tray table in its upright position, but when I looked up from my phone, he was still there, still solid, still real. "Is everything all right?" he asked. His voice was gentle, grandfatherly almost. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. "I always sit in 14B, he said, as if that explained everything. "Every Tuesday, same flight, same seat, have been for years." I finally found my voice. "What's your name? Does it matter?" He folded his newspaper neatly, creasing it with precise movements. "You won't find it on your list. You won't find me anywhere, but I'm here. I'm always here on Tuesdays." "That's impossible." "Is it?" He adjusted his glasses. "You're at 35,000 feet, traveling at 500 miles per hour in a pressurized tube. You're defying gravity itself. But a passenger existing without paperwork? That's where you draw the line on impossible?" I backed away slowly, returned to the galley. Patricia found me 15 minutes later, pale and gripping the counter. "You need to tell the captain," I said. "We have an unauthorized passenger." She sighed, clearly thinking I'd lost it, but she went forward anyway. I waited, watching row 14 from a distance. The man had gone back to his newspaper. He turned a page, sipped his tomato juice, existed. Patricia returned with the captain. He was irritated, clearly pulled away from something important. "What's the problem?" I explained. He pulled out his tablet and checked the manifest himself. 87 passengers total, he said. All accounted for. Seat 14B is listed as unoccupied, but someone's sitting there. He walked up the aisle, looked at seat 14B, looked at me. There's no one there. The man waved at me, a small, almost apologetic wave. I didn't sleep the rest of the flight. I stayed in the galley, watching. The man never moved except to turn pages and occasionally check his watch. When we began our descent into Boston, he fastened his seatbelt like everyone else. When we landed, and the seatbelt sign turned off, he stood up, retrieved his briefcase from under the seat, and joined the line of passengers deplaning. I positioned myself near the exit, determined to confront him, to get answers, to understand what was happening. The passengers filed past. The elderly couple. The college student. The businessman from 7C, then him. The man from 14B. He was 3 people away, then 2. Then, right in front of me. "Have a good night," I said, blocking his path slightly. He stopped, looked at me with something like sadness in his eyes. "You too. And please, try not to worry about this. It's just the way some things are." "Wait," I started, but he'd already stepped past me onto the jet bridge. I turned to follow him. He was gone. Not around the corner, not mixed into the crowd, just gone. Vanished in the 3 seconds I'd turned my head. I stood there in the empty jet bridge, listening to the echo of footsteps from passengers who'd already moved on. My heart was hammering. Patricia touched my shoulder. "You okay?" I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. 3 days later, I couldn't let it go. I logged into the company system and searched the flight records. I went back through years of Tuesday night flights on that route. And then I found it. 7 years ago, same flight number, same route. A passenger named Michael Rourke suffered a fatal heart attack mid-flight. He was a sales director who flew that route every single Tuesday for work. His company had a contract that always booked him the same seat. 14B. He died in that seat while the plane was still in the air. They couldn't do anything, just had to keep flying with his body strapped in place, hidden behind a blanket, while the other passengers slept. I've worked dozens of Tuesday flights on that route since then. I've checked seat 14B every single time. According to the manifest, it's always empty. But sometimes, when the cabin lights are dimmed and most passengers are sleeping, I see him. Just for a moment. Reading his newspaper, drinking his tomato juice, going wherever he needs to go. I never asked Patricia or the captain if they really couldn't see him or if they just chose not to. Some questions don't have answers you want to hear, but I'll tell you this. If you ever fly a Tuesday red-eye from Denver to Boston, and you're checking the seating chart for an empty row to stretch out, and you see that 14B is available, choose a different seat. Trust me on this. Some passengers have been flying longer than you can imagine, and they're not ready to land yet. Listen, I know airplane bathrooms are awful. Everyone knows this. They're cramped. They smell like chemical blue liquid and recycled air. And there's always that moment of anxiety when you're trying to figure out which way the lock slides. But what happened to me goes beyond uncomfortable. It goes beyond claustrophobic. What happened to me shouldn't be possible. I was on a flight from Seattle to Miami. Middle of the afternoon, nothing special. The flight was about half full, and I'd taken a window seat near the back because I like watching the ground fall away during takeoff. We'd been in the air for maybe 2 hours when I felt that familiar pressure in my bladder. I unbuckled, squeezed past the guy in the aisle seat, who barely looked up from his tablet, and headed to the rear lavatory. The occupied sign wasn't lit. I pressed the button, heard the mechanical click, and stepped inside. The door closed behind me with that hollow airplane bathroom sound. You know the one. That pressurized hiss, followed by the lock sliding into place. I turned the lock to occupied. The little indicator on the outside would show red now. Standard procedure. I'd done this 100 times on 100 different flights. I finished quickly because, again, airplane bathrooms are disgusting, and you don't want to spend any more time in them than absolutely necessary. Washed my hands with that weird foam soap that never quite feels like it rinses off. Checked my reflection in the tiny mirror. I looked tired. My hair was a mess from leaning against the window. Nothing unusual. I reached for the lock to slide it open. It didn't move. I tried again, putting more force into it. The lock mechanism was stuck. Not jammed exactly, but like it was welded in place, like someone had superglued it while I was washing my hands. I pulled harder and felt that first flutter of panic in my chest. You know that feeling. When something that should work doesn't, and you're suddenly aware of how small the space around you is. I knocked on the door. 3 solid knocks. "Hey, I'm stuck in here. The lock won't open." I heard footsteps immediately. That soft padding sound of someone walking down the aisle. Then a woman's voice, professional and slightly concerned. A flight attendant. "One moment, sir. Are you having trouble with the door?" "Yeah, the lock's jammed or something. I can't get it open." I heard her try the handle from the outside. The door rattled slightly, but didn't budge. "Okay, just hold on. Let me get something to help with this." I waited, counted to 60 in my head. The bathroom suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed closer. I could hear my own breathing, louder than it should be. The ventilation fan hummed above me. That constant white noise that normally fades into the background was now the only sound in my universe. The flight attendant returned. I heard her voice again, but this time it sounded confused. "Sir? Are you still in there?" "Yes, I'm still in here. Where else would I be?" There was a pause. A long pause that made my stomach tighten. "Sir, the indicator is showing vacant, and when I look through the gap, I don't see anyone inside." My blood went cold. "What are you talking about? I'm right here. I'm standing right in front of the door. I understand you think you're in there, but—" She stopped. I heard her talking to someone else, another crew member maybe. Their voices were muffled, but I caught fragments. "Nobody inside. He says he's in there. Check the handle again." I pounded on the door. Hard. 5, 6, 7 times. My fist made solid contact with the plastic surface. I felt the impact vibrate up my arm. "I'm in here. I'm literally right here." The flight attendant's voice came back, and now she sounded genuinely unsettled. "Sir, I need you to stay calm. We're going to figure this out." "But I'm looking directly at this bathroom right now, and there's no one inside. The door is showing vacant, and I can see through the crack that the space is empty." "That's impossible. You're looking at me right now. I'm on the other side of this door. I'm not seeing anyone." I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, pulled it up. No signal, which was expected at 30,000 feet, but that wasn't what made my hands start shaking. It was the time. When I'd entered the bathroom, it had been 3:47 p.m. I'd checked specifically because I was trying to calculate when we'd land. My phone now read 3:47 p.m. The same time, exactly the same. The numbers weren't moving. I watched the screen for 15 seconds, counting in my head. The time stayed frozen at 3:47. "Something's wrong," I said, and I hated how my voice cracked. "Something's really wrong." I looked around the bathroom, really looked at it for the first time since I'd noticed the lock wouldn't open. And that's when I started seeing the differences. Small things, wrong things. The mirror was on the left side of the sink. I was certain, absolutely certain, it had been on the right when I'd washed my hands. The soap dispenser had moved too. It was now above the toilet instead of next to the sink. The walls were a slightly different shade of beige, less yellowed, cleaner. I touched the wall. It felt different. The texture was wrong, smoother, like it was newer. "Let me out," I said, then louder. "Let me out." I threw myself against the door. My shoulder hit hard enough that pain exploded down my arm. The door didn't move. Didn't even rattle. It was solid, immovable. Like I was hitting a wall, not a flimsy airplane bathroom door. I could still hear the flight attendant outside. She was talking to someone else, maybe a passenger. "No, I understand, sir. But there's definitely no one in there. The bathroom has been empty this entire flight. I've been keeping track." Then, directed at me through the door, "Sir, if you can hear me, I need you to try the lock one more time." I grabbed the lock mechanism, twisted it with everything I had. My palm was sweating, the metal was slick, it wouldn't budge. Then I heard something that made my breath catch. Another voice outside. A man's voice, deep and irritated. "Look, I need to use the bathroom. If it's empty, just let me in." "Sir, there's someone inside," the flight attendant said. But she sounded uncertain now, like she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "The sign says vacant," the man insisted. I heard him try the handle, from the outside. I watched the door handle move, watched it turn, but the door stayed locked from my side. How could it be vacant from his perspective and locked from mine? "I'm in here," I screamed. I pounded on the door until my fists hurt. "I'm right here." "There's no one responding," the man said. "Just open it." "I'll get the override key," the flight attendant replied. "Just give me a moment." I pressed my ear against the door, heard footsteps receding, then silence, then more footsteps returning. The sound of metal scraping, a key in a lock. The door clicked. It swung open so suddenly, I almost fell forward. I stumbled out into the aisle, catching myself on a seat back. The flight attendant jumped back, eyes wide. The man who'd wanted to use the bathroom stared at me like I'd materialized out of thin air. "Where did you?" the flight attendant started. "You weren't." I didn't let her finish. I pushed past them, heading back to my seat. My legs felt weak. The guy in the aisle seat looked up at me as I climbed over him. "That was fast," he said. "You were only gone like a minute." I pulled out my phone. Checked the time. 3:48 p.m. 1 minute. I'd been gone 1 minute, according to every clock, every device, every person on this plane. But I'd been in that bathroom for at least 15 minutes, maybe longer. Time had been elastic in there, stretched out. Or I'd been somewhere else entirely, some pocket of space where the rules didn't apply the same way. I sat down, buckled my seatbelt even though the sign was off. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I reached into my jacket pocket for a tissue to wipe the sweat off my face. My fingers touched paper. I pulled it out. A napkin, white, with that slightly rough texture of recycled paper. I didn't remember putting it there. I unfolded it. There was handwriting on it. Blue ink. Neat, precise letters that looked like they'd been written by someone who learned cursive decades ago. It said, "You're the 7th one this month. We don't know how to fix it. Please don't fly this route again." At the bottom, in smaller letters, "We're sorry." The napkin had a logo printed in the corner. An airline logo I didn't recognize at first. Then I did, and my blood turned to ice. It was Trans-Pacific Airways. I knew that logo because I'd done a school report on aviation disasters in 10th grade. Trans-Pacific Airways went bankrupt in 1987. They'd been defunct for nearly 40 years. The napkin in my hand was old, yellow at the edges. The paper felt brittle, like it might crumble if I held it too tight. But the ink was fresh. The warning was fresh. Written for me. Written today. I looked up at the bathroom at the rear of the cabin. The vacant sign was lit green. A woman was walking toward it now, reaching for the handle. I wanted to warn her. Wanted to scream at her, to choose a different bathroom, a different flight, anything. But what would I say? That the bathroom exists in 2 places at once? That time doesn't work right in there? That someone or something from a dead airline is trying to send warnings through folded napkins? She went inside. The door closed. The sign switched to occupied. I watched that sign for the rest of the flight. Watched it turn green after 2 minutes. Watched her walk out, looking completely normal, completely fine. Maybe it doesn't happen every time. Maybe it's random. Or maybe it only happens to certain people. The 7th one this month, the note said. I still have that napkin. I keep it in my wallet, pressed between my license and a credit card. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, just to confirm I didn't imagine the whole thing. The paper gets more brittle every time I touch it. The writing is starting to fade, but it's real. It exists. I've flown dozens of times since then, different airlines, different routes, and I've never once used an airplane bathroom. I don't care how long the flight is. I don't care how uncomfortable I get, because I know now that those tiny spaces aren't entirely in this world. They're between things. Between places. Between moments in time. And sometimes, when you step inside and close that door, you don't end up where you think you're going. You end up somewhere else. Somewhere that looks identical, but isn't. Somewhere that keeps you just long enough to send you back, changed. So next time you're on a flight and you need to use the lavatory, pay attention. Check the mirror position before and after. Check your phone's clock. Make sure the soap dispenser stays in the same place. Because if it doesn't, if things start moving around you, if time stops making sense, you might not come back to the same flight you left. You might come back to one that looks identical, but is slightly wrong in ways you can't quite name. And somewhere, in a pocket that exists outside normal space, there are bathrooms that have trapped pieces of time itself, moments that loop, people who got stuck. Warnings written on napkins from airlines that don't exist anymore. I was the 7th one that month. I wonder how many there have been since. You ever notice how airplane windows are smaller than they should be? Like they're designed to give you just enough view to remember you're not on the ground anymore, but not enough to really see what's out there? I never thought about it much until the flight from London to New York. Now I think about it constantly. Now I understand why they keep those windows small. I had a window seat. 12A. I always book window seats because I like watching the world shrink beneath me during takeoff. There's something calming about it, you know? Seeing houses turn into toys, cars into ants, everything becoming small and manageable and far away. It reminds me that my problems are small too. Temporary, just a matter of perspective. We took off just after noon. Clear skies, beautiful day. The kind of flight where you can see the curvature of the earth if you look hard enough. I watched England fall away beneath us. watched the patchwork fields and winding roads get swallowed by clouds, and then we were above it all. Nothing but blue sky and sunlight, and that endless white carpet of cloud cover below. I must have dozed off about an hour into the flight. I do that sometimes. The engine hum is like white noise, and once we're at cruising altitude, there's nothing to see anyway, just clouds and more clouds. So I closed my eyes, leaned my head against the window, and drifted. When I woke up, it was dark outside my window. Not evening dark, not sunset dark, full night, stars visible, deep space black. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks after sleeping. But no. The darkness remained. I could see stars outside my window. Constellations I didn't recognize. And something about the quality of the darkness felt wrong. Too deep, too absolute. Here's the thing though. The cabin was still bright. The overhead lights were on. And when I looked past the headrest in front of me, I could see other passengers' windows. They showed exactly what they should show. Bright afternoon sunlight, white clouds, blue sky. Just my window showed night. I sat up straight, pressed my face closer to the glass. The darkness outside was complete. Not a single trace of daylight. And those stars, they were too bright. Too sharp. Like they were closer than stars should be. I could see them pulsing slightly. Breathing almost. The guy next to me in the middle seat was asleep, head tilted back, mouth open. Beyond him, the woman in the aisle seat was reading a magazine, completely oblivious. I looked back at my window. Still dark, still wrong. "Excuse me," I said to the woman. She looked up from her magazine. "Could you look at my window for a second? Tell me what you see." She gave me that look people give on airplanes when a stranger asks them something weird. But she leaned forward slightly and glanced past the sleeping guy toward my window. "Looks like clouds," she said. "Why? You see daylight?" "Yeah. Blue sky. Is something wrong?" I looked at the window again. From my perspective, it showed pure darkness and those two bright stars. "No," I said quietly. "Never mind." She went back to her magazine. I went back to staring at impossible night. I told myself it was the window tint, some weird polarization effect, a trick of the light. But I've flown hundreds of times. I know what airplane windows look like. This wasn't a tint issue. This was something else. I reached up and touched the plastic shade, thinking maybe I'd pulled it down without realizing. But no, it was fully open. My fingers trembled as I pulled it down anyway, blocking out the darkness. I counted to 60. Slow, measured breaths. When I opened it again, maybe everything would be normal. I pulled the shade back up. The darkness was still there. But now there was something else. Movement. Something massive passing beneath the plane. I couldn't see it clearly, just the absence of stars as something huge blocked them out. The shape was organic, flowing, like watching a whale pass under a boat, except we were 7 miles up, and there was nothing that large that could exist at this altitude. My heart was hammering now. I looked at the other windows again, desperate for confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. They all showed normal afternoon sky. Clouds, sunlight. Reality. Just mine showed the impossible. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I angled the phone toward the window and took a picture. The flash went off, making the sleeping guy next to me stir slightly. I looked at the photo. In the image, my window showed exactly what everyone else's showed. Bright daylight, white clouds, normal sky. I looked up from my phone to the actual window. Still dark, still stars, still that massive something moving in the depths. "This isn't real," I whispered. "This can't be real." But it was. I was seeing it. My eyes were processing it. My brain was recording every detail. The darkness, the stars in wrong positions. The thing below that was too big to exist. I pressed the flight attendant call button. The light above my seat turned on. I waited, watching that darkness, watching whatever was down there glide through space that should have been empty air and cloud vapor. A flight attendant appeared in the aisle. Young guy, professionally friendly. "Can I help you with something?" "My window," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something wrong with it. Could you look at it?" He leaned over, glanced at the window. "Looks fine to me. What's the problem? You see daylight out there?" Clouds? Yeah. Clear view. Nice day for flying. He smiled. Is the glare bothering you? I can show you how to adjust the shade. No, I stopped. What was I supposed to say? That I was seeing a different reality through this window? That night had fallen outside my personal viewport while the rest of the plane flew through afternoon? Never mind. I'm fine. He gave me a concerned look. You sure? You look a little pale. Do you need some water? I'm fine, I repeated. Thank you. He left. I sat there, trapped with this window and whatever truth it was showing me. Because that's what it felt like. Not a hallucination. Not a trick. Truth. Like this window had somehow lost its filter, stopped showing me the comfortable lie, and started displaying what was actually out there. I don't know how long I sat there staring. Could have been 10 minutes. Could have been an hour. Time felt strange. Elastic. At some point, I noticed something else in that darkness. Lights. Not stars. These were different. Closer. Moving with intention. They looked almost like running lights on an aircraft, but the pattern was wrong. Too many of them. Arranged in configurations that made no sense. And they were getting closer. I watched them approach. 3 of them. No. 4. No, I couldn't count them. They seemed to multiply and divide, existing in uncertain numbers. They moved through that darkness outside my window with fluid grace, and as they got closer, I could almost make out shapes behind the lights. Structures, massive ones, like buildings floating in the void. The sleeping guy next to me finally woke up. He yawned, stretched, looked around. Then he looked at me. You okay, man? You're sweating. I realized he was right. I was drenched in sweat. My shirt was soaked. Yeah, I managed. Just not great with flying. He nodded sympathetically. Want to trade seats? Azle might be better if you're feeling claustrophobic. I almost said yes, almost took the escape, but something made me stay. I needed to see this through, needed to understand what was happening. No. I'm good. Thanks though. He shrugged and pulled out his phone, started scrolling through photos. Normal, easy, comfortable in his reality where windows showed what they were supposed to show. I looked back at my window. The lights were very close now, and I could see it wasn't just darkness out there anymore. There were shapes, structures, things that existed in that space between spaces. I saw what looked like cities suspended in the void. Impossibly tall towers that stretched into forever. Bridges connecting nothing to nothing. And movement, so much movement, things living there, flying there, existing there, in that hidden layer of reality. I reached for the window shade again. My hand was shaking uncontrollably now. I needed to close it, needed to block this out, needed to return to the safe lie. But before I could pull it down, I saw something that made me freeze. A face, pressed against the outside of my window, looking in, looking directly at me. It was human, mostly. The features were almost right. 2 eyes, nose, mouth. But the proportions were wrong. The eyes too large. The mouth too wide. And it was smiling. A knowing smile. Like it had been waiting for me to notice. Waiting for someone to finally see. We locked eyes. Me and this thing outside, at 35,000 feet. Outside in space that should have been empty, except for thin air and distance. Its mouth moved. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I could read the lips. You see now. Not a question. A statement. I yanked the shade down so hard the plastic cracked. Sat there with my eyes squeezed shut, breathing in ragged gasps. The guy next to me asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. I kept that shade closed for the rest of the flight. Didn't open it once. Not during landing. Not when we touched down. Not until I was off that plane and back in the terminal with solid ground under my feet. But I think about it constantly. That window, that darkness, those lights and structures, and that face pressed against the glass. Because here's what terrifies me most. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a hallucination. That window was working perfectly. It was showing me exactly what was out there. All the other windows were the ones malfunctioning. They were showing the comfortable lie, the version of reality we can handle. Blue sky and clouds and empty air. Safe, manageable, untrue. My window showed the truth. And the truth is that when you're up there, 7 miles above the earth, you're not flying through empty sky, you're flying through something else. Something populated, something aware. Something that knows you're there and watches you pass through. Every flight I've taken since, I close the window shade before takeoff. I don't look out. Don't want to risk seeing it again. But sometimes, when I feel the plane reach cruising altitude, I wonder which version of reality my window is showing. The lie or the truth. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I'd kept watching. If I'd stared into that darkness long enough. Would I have seen more? Understood more? Or would I have seen too much? Would that face pressed against the glass have found a way inside? I don't know, and I'm not brave enough to find out. But I'll tell you this, next time you're on a flight, and you look out your window at nice, normal, empty sky, consider the possibility that your window is lying to you. Consider that maybe somewhere on that plane, someone has a window that's showing the truth. And they're sitting there, sweating, terrified, watching things that weren't supposed to be visible. Maybe that someone is you next time. Maybe your window will be the one that stops lying. And when you see that darkness, those lights, that face pressed against the glass, you'll understand why the windows are so small. Why they give you just enough view to feel safe, but not enough to see what's really out there. Because some truths aren't meant to be seen at 35,000 feet. Some truths will follow you home. I want you to remember the last flight you took. Think about those announcements. The ones you don't really listen to anymore because you've heard them 1,000 times. The safety demonstration, the cruising altitude update, the weather at your destination. They all blur together, don't they? Just background noise, white noise, safe, predictable, forgettable. I wish I could forget the announcements on Flight 1544 from Phoenix to Chicago. I wish they'd been forgettable. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Budget airline. The kind where you pay extra for everything, including the privilege of boarding, before everyone else scrambles for overhead bin space. The flight was completely full. Every single seat occupied. You know that feeling when you board a packed flight, and you can already sense the exhaustion of being squeezed next to strangers for 3 hours? That was the energy. Everyone just wanted to get where they were going. I was in 23C, middle seat. Window seat had a teenager with headphones already blasting music loud enough I could hear it. Aisle seat had a businessman who'd claimed both armrests before I even sat down. Perfect. I wedged myself in, buckled up, and prepared for the standard uncomfortable flight. The safety demonstration started normally enough. Flight attendant at the front of the cabin, going through the motions we've all seen 100 times. Seatbelt, oxygen mask, flotation device. Her voice over the intercom was professional, rehearsed, exactly what you'd expect. Then she added something. And please note that passengers in seat 23C should keep their seatbelt fastened even when the sign is off. I looked up. That was my seat. 23C. Why would they single out my specific seat? The flight attendant was still at the front, continuing with the standard demonstration. No one else seemed to have noticed. The teenager next to me was still absorbed in his phone. The businessman was reading an email. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she'd said row 23, not seat 23C specifically. I settled back, tried to shake off the weird feeling crawling up my spine. We took off without incident. Smooth ascent. The seatbelt sign turned off after about 20 minutes. I didn't unbuckle. That announcement was still rattling around in my head. Keep your seatbelt fastened. Why? What did they know that I didn't? The first in-flight announcement came about 40 minutes into the flight. Different flight attendant this time. Older woman, calm voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently cruising at 37,000 feet. If you're seated in rows 8 through 12, you might want to close your window shades in approximately 40 minutes. I sat up straighter. That was oddly specific. Why rows 8 through 12? Why 40 minutes? I craned my neck to look toward those rows. A few passengers glanced at their windows, confused, but most people ignored it completely. They went back to their books, their movies, their naps. But I couldn't ignore it. Something was wrong. These weren't normal announcements. The businessman next to me was completely oblivious. He'd started working on his laptop, spreadsheets and graphs filling his screen. The teenager had fallen asleep, head tilted against the window. Neither of them had reacted to either announcement. 20 minutes later, another announcement. Same calm voice. For passengers traveling with the woman in the blue cardigan, she'll want to think very carefully before making that phone call when we land. My hands went cold. I looked around the cabin. 3 rows ahead, a woman in a blue cardigan was reading a magazine. She hadn't reacted at all, hadn't even looked up. How had the announcement known about her? How had it known about a phone call that hadn't happened yet? A man across the aisle from me caught my eye. He looked as unsettled as I felt. He'd heard it too. We made brief eye contact, and I saw my own confusion and fear reflected in his expression. At least I wasn't alone in noticing. The next announcement came 15 minutes later. The gentleman with the tattoo sleeve in row 19 should check his connecting gate twice. The first gate number will be wrong. I twisted in my seat to look back. Row 19. A guy with a full sleeve of tattoos on his left arm was sitting there, staring straight ahead with wide eyes. He'd heard it. He'd definitely heard it. He looked around frantically, but no one else was reacting. The flight attendants were calmly moving through the cabin with the beverage cart, like nothing unusual was happening. The man across the aisle leaned toward me slightly. "You're hearing this too?" he whispered. I nodded. What the hell is going on? I didn't have an answer. I unbuckled my seatbelt, against every instinct that remembered that first announcement, and stood up. I needed to find a flight attendant. Needed to understand what these announcements meant. I walked forward toward the galley. A flight attendant was there, organizing snack boxes. Young guy, maybe mid-20s. "Excuse me," I said. "The announcements, the specific ones about passengers, what's that about?" He looked at me blankly. "I'm sorry?" "The announcements. About specific seats. About the woman in the blue cardigan. About the tattoo sleeve guy." His expression shifted to concern. "Sir, we haven't made any announcements like that. Just the standard updates about altitude and beverage service." "No, I heard them. Multiple people heard them. Specific instructions about passengers." He glanced past me toward the cabin, then back at my face. "Sir, are you feeling all right? Sometimes altitude and pressure changes can cause—" "I'm not imagining this," I insisted. Another announcement cut through the cabin. That same calm female voice. "For those passengers who have heard these warnings, we're very sorry. For those who didn't hear them, please enjoy the rest of your flight." I spun around to look at the flight attendant. "You heard that, right? Tell me you heard that." His face was professionally sympathetic. "Sir, I think you should return to your seat. Can I get you some water?" I walked back to 23C in a daze. The man across the aisle caught my eye again. "They don't hear it," he said quietly. I tried asking too. "They think we're crazy." I sat down, rebuckled my seatbelt. My heart was racing. The teenager next to me woke up, yawned, and immediately went back to his phone. The businessman was still working on his laptop. Normal. Everything was normal for them. But it wasn't normal. Those announcements were real. I'd heard them. Multiple people had heard them, and they were specific. They were warnings. But warnings about what? I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder. If another announcement came, I was going to record it. Proof. I needed proof. We flew for another hour. No more announcements. I started to wonder if it was over. If whatever had been speaking through the intercom had finished saying what it needed to say. The man across the aisle had relaxed too. He'd gone back to reading a book, though I noticed he kept glancing up at the speaker above his head. Then, just as we started our initial descent, one final announcement. The voice was different this time. Male, deep, slow. And underneath it, so faint I almost missed it, there was another sound. A whining. Like alarms. Emergency alerts. And something else. Something that sounded like screaming. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your final announcement. For those of you who heard the warnings today, they were real. The woman in the blue cardigan will receive a call about her daughter's accident. If she answers while driving to pick up her son, she won't see the red light. The man with the tattoo sleeve has a gate change that isn't in the system yet. If he goes to the wrong gate, he'll miss the flight that would have crashed. And seat 23C, you kept your seatbelt fastened. You'll walk away from this. The teenager next to you won't be so lucky if there's turbulence in the next 6 minutes." My blood turned to ice. I looked at the teenager. He was still absorbed in his phone, completely unaware. Those who didn't hear these announcements will experience probability as it was meant to unfold. Those who did hear them have been given a choice. We cannot tell you more. We cannot explain why some of you can hear us. But we've been broadcasting from Flight 1549 U.S. Airways, January 15, 2009. We've been trying to warn people ever since. Some of you can hear across time, most cannot. For those who can, we're sorry we can't save everyone. We can only warn you. What you do with that warning is up to you. The announcement ended with a click. I sat frozen. Flight 1549, U.S. Airways, January 15, 2009. I knew that flight. Everyone knew that flight. The Miracle on the Hudson. The plane that lost both engines and landed in the river. Everyone survived. But the terror of those moments before they hit the water that had been real. And somehow, voices from that flight were still broadcasting. Still trying to warn people. Still trying to change outcomes. I looked at my phone. The voice recorder had been running. My hands shaking. I played it back. Static. Just static, and the normal ambient noise of the cabin. No voice, no announcement, nothing. But I'd heard it. The man across the aisle had heard it. I could see it in his face, the way his hands gripped his book, the way his eyes were locked on nothing. Severe turbulence hit 6 minutes later. Exactly 6 minutes. The plane dropped, lurched, dropped again. Overhead bins flew open. Someone screamed. The teenager next to me slammed forward against his seatbelt, his head snapping back with a sickening crack as we hit another air pocket. I was pressed back into my seat, my own seatbelt holding me firmly in place. The businessman's laptop flew into the air, smashed into the ceiling, fell. The teenager's phone cracked against the seat in front of him. It lasted 30 seconds, maybe less, but it felt like forever. When we finally stabilized, there was chaos. The teenager was unconscious, blood running from a gash on his forehead. Flight attendants rushed over. The businessman was clutching his wrist broken, probably. All around me, people were crying, checking themselves for injuries. I was completely fine, not a scratch, because I'd kept my seatbelt fastened, because I'd heard the warning. We landed 20 minutes later. Emergency vehicles were waiting. The teenager was taken off on a stretcher, alive, but badly hurt. The businessman had his wrist wrapped. At least a dozen other passengers had various injuries from the turbulence. I walked off that plane without a mark on me. At the gate, I saw the woman in the blue cardigan. She was on her phone, crying. I heard fragments. Accident, daughter, hospital. The call had come. Just like the voice said it would. The man with the tattoo sleeve was at the gate display, staring at his boarding pass, and then at the screen. His connecting gate had changed. He looked at me. We both understood. I don't know what Flight 1549 went through in those terrifying minutes before they hit the Hudson River, but somehow, some part of that experience fractured time, created a loop, a warning system, voices reaching across years, trying to save people they'll never meet. Most people can't hear it. They fly every day, oblivious to the announcements underneath the announcements. The warnings hidden in static. But some of us can hear, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I've flown 8 times since that day. I've heard the warnings on 3 of those flights. Specific, personal, impossible to dismiss, and every time, I've listened. Every time, those warnings have been correct. I don't know why I can hear them. I don't know why some can and others can't. But I know this. The next time you're on a flight, and an announcement seems oddly specific, strangely personal, impossibly prescient, pay attention. Someone from another flight, another time, another disaster might be trying to save your life. And whatever you do, if they tell you to keep your seatbelt fastened, keep it fastened. I've been flying commercial aircraft for 17 years. 17 years of pre-flight checks, weather briefings, ATC communications, and landing gear that goes down when it's supposed to. You develop a rhythm in this job. A routine. Everything becomes muscle memory. Radio calls especially. You say the same phrases so many times they stop being words and become sounds. Automatic, effortless. That's why I noticed immediately when my voice said something I didn't say. It was a night flight from Dallas to Anchorage. Long haul over some of the most remote territory in North America. My co-pilot was new, maybe 6 months out of training. Still had that nervousness that makes you triple-check everything. Good kid. Competent. The kind of pilot who'd rather ask a stupid question than make a stupid mistake. We'd been in the air for about 90 minutes when it happened. We were over northern Montana, nothing but darkness below us and stars above. ATC had just cleared us to climb to flight level 390. Standard stuff. I reached for the radio. Denver Center, flight 447 climbing to flight level 390. The response came back immediately. Flight 447, Denver Center, Roger. Maintain heading 285. But here's the thing. I hadn't pressed the transmit button yet. My finger was still an inch away from it when I heard my own voice make that call. Same cadence, same slight rasp I get after talking for a few hours, same everything. My co-pilot looked at me. "Did you just—" "No," I said. "I didn't transmit that." We both stared at the radio panel. The transmit light hadn't illuminated. I hadn't pressed the button, but ATC had heard something. They'd responded to a call that came from my voice but not from me. "Maybe it was delayed," my co-pilot suggested, "from an earlier transmission? We haven't talked to Denver in 40 minutes. He went pale. I felt my own pulse starting to quicken. In 17 years, I'd dealt with equipment failures. I'd dealt with medical emergencies, drunk passengers, and that one time someone tried to open the cabin door mid-flight. But I'd never dealt with this. Radio equipment doesn't just spontaneously transmit in your voice. That's not a thing that happens. 10 minutes later, it happened again. ATC called with a routing change. Flight 447, Denver Center. Turn left heading 270, direct to waypoint Homer. I was reaching for the radio to acknowledge when I heard my voice respond. Denver Center, Flight 447, turning left 270. Direct Homer. Perfect phraseology, perfect tone. My voice, but I hadn't said it. My co-pilot saw my face. "Captain, that wasn't me," I said quietly. "But I heard you. ATC heard you. Who else could it?" "It wasn't me." I pressed the transmit button. Denver Center, Flight 447. "Can you confirm you're receiving our transmissions clearly?" Flight 447, Denver Center, affirmative. "You're coming through 5x5. 5x5. Perfect clarity." They were hearing something. Someone, using my voice, making perfect radio calls, following proper procedures. But it wasn't me. I looked at my co-pilot. He was gripping the yoke so tight his knuckles were white. "What do we do?" "We keep flying," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's probably some kind of radio crosstalk. Interference. It'll resolve itself." But I didn't believe that. And from the look on his face, neither did he. The flight continued. Every time ATC called us, that other voice responded before I could. Always perfect, always appropriate, always in my exact voice. My co-pilot stopped talking. Just sat there, hands on the controls, eyes flicking between the instruments and the radio panel like it might attack us. Then, about 2 hours into the flight, the other voice made a call that I definitely hadn't made and wouldn't have made. Denver Center, Flight 447, requesting heading change to 250. I grabbed the radio immediately. Denver Center, disregard that last transmission. Flight 447, maintaining current heading. There was a pause. A long pause. Then, Flight 447, Denver Center, we show you already turning to 250. Confirm your intentions. I looked at the heading indicator. We were turning. The autopilot had engaged a turn to heading 250. I hadn't touched it. My co-pilot hadn't touched it. But the plane was turning. I disengaged the autopilot and manually brought us back to our assigned heading. Denver Center, Flight 447, maintaining 285. We're experiencing some autopilot anomalies. Roger, Flight 447, advise when ready to continue. My hands were shaking now. The autopilot shouldn't be able to change headings without input. That's not how it works. There are safeguards, redundancies. You can't just accidentally command a turn. But something had commanded that turn. Something that knew how to access the flight management system. Something that was using my voice to communicate with ATC. "Captain," my co-pilot said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to declare an emergency. This isn't normal. This isn't." Flight 447. This is Denver Center. We're showing your transponder, indicating an altitude of 37,000 feet. You should be at 39,000. Confirm altitude. I checked the altimeter. 39,000 feet. Exactly where we were supposed to be. Denver Center, Flight 447, is level at flight level 390. Our instruments show correct altitude. Flight 447, Denver Center, understood. We're showing conflicting data from your transponder. Then I heard it again. My voice. But this time, it wasn't on the radio. It was in the cockpit. Behind me. Quiet. Conversational. Like I was talking to myself. Keep her steady. Weather ahead at waypoint Delta. I spun in my seat. The cockpit was empty except for me and my co-pilot, but I'd heard it. Clear as day. My voice. Speaking from somewhere in the cockpit. My co-pilot had heard it too. His face had gone completely white. "That's not possible," he breathed. "Keep her steady," the voice said again. Louder this time. More insistent. "Weather ahead." I pulled up the weather radar. There was nothing. Clear skies all the way to Anchorage. No storms. No weather systems. Nothing that would require any action. But the voice was wrong about something else too. Something that made my blood run cold. "Keep her steady" was a phrase I hadn't used in 15 years. It was something my instructor pilot used to say. The man who trained me, who taught me everything about flying, who died in a crash 12 years ago. He had a distinctive voice. Deep, gravelly, with a slight accent. And I'd picked up some of his speech patterns during training. His cadence, his phrasing. I'd sounded like him for years before I developed my own style. That voice in the cockpit wasn't just mine. It was mine from 15 years ago, when I still sounded like him. Flight 447, Denver Center. We're going to need you to squawk 7,700 and divert to the nearest suitable airport. We're showing multiple system anomalies from your aircraft. 7700. The emergency transponder code. They wanted us to declare an emergency and land immediately. Before I could respond, my voice came through the radio again. Denver Center, Flight 447, negative on the diversion. We're continuing to destination. All systems normal. "That's not my call," I shouted, grabbing the radio. Denver Center, Flight 447, disregard. We're squawking 7,700 and requesting vectors to nearest. The autopilot engaged again. This time I felt the yoke move against my hands, fighting me. The aircraft banked left, turning away from any nearby airports, heading deeper into the wilderness. I wrestled with the controls. My co-pilot was doing the same on his side. But something was overpowering us. Something was flying the plane. Denver Center, Flight 447. I transmitted. "We've lost control authority. The aircraft is not responding to pilot input." The response that came back was in my voice. Calm, professional, unconcerned. Denver Center, Flight 447, disregard previous transmission. All systems nominal. Continuing navigation as filed. "That's not me," I screamed into the radio. My co-pilot was frantically going through the circuit breakers, trying to isolate whatever system was controlling the autopilot. The plane continued its turn. I checked the navigation display. We were heading northwest, away from any airports, away from any roads or civilization, toward the mountains. The voice spoke again in the cockpit, louder now, filling the space. "Keep her steady. You remember this, don't you? You remember what happened, what I told you about this route." And I did remember. Suddenly, horribly, I remembered. 15 years ago, my instructor pilot, the last flight we did together before I got certified, he pulled up this exact route on the planning software, showed me something, told me something about it. What was it? "There's an old airstrip," the voice said, and I was remembering as it spoke. Abandoned. From the 50s. Used to be a refueling station for military flights. It's not on any charts anymore. But it's still there. I remembered now. He'd told me about it. Shown me the exact coordinates. Said if I ever had an emergency on this route, that's where I should go. Not in the manual, not officially approved, but it was there, a backup, a secret. He'd said something else too, something I'd forgotten until this moment. "If anything ever happens to me on a flight," he told me, "if I can't finish what I started, I'll find a way to complete it. I'll find a way to land the plane." 2 weeks after that conversation, he'd been flying this exact route. Engine failure. He'd tried to make it to Fairbanks. Didn't make it. The plane went down in the mountains. They found the wreckage 6 months later. He'd been trying to reach that old airstrip. Had been 50 miles short. The voice in the cockpit was crying now. I could hear it. My voice, his voice, whatever it was. I almost made it. I was so close. Let me finish it. Let me land the plane. Please. I've been trying for 12 years. I just need to land the plane. The aircraft leveled off. I wasn't fighting the controls anymore. My hands had gone numb. My co-pilot was staring at me with pure terror. Denver Center, Flight 447, is experiencing a complete system failure, my voice said over the radio, calm, resigned. We're attempting emergency landing at coordinates north 63.4, west 149.2. Notify search and rescue. Those were the coordinates. The old airstrip, the one that wasn't on any charts. I looked at the navigation display. We were heading straight for it, 50 miles out. Captain, my co-pilot whispered. What do we do? I didn't know. I didn't have an answer. Because the thing flying our plane wasn't malicious. It wasn't trying to crash us. It was trying to complete a flight from 12 years ago. A flight that ended in mountains and fire and a body that took 6 months to find. My instructor pilot had died trying to land. And somehow, impossibly, he'd found a way to try again. Using my voice, my aircraft, my flight. The old airstrip came into view. It was barely visible in the darkness. Just a strip of cracked concrete overgrown with brush. Too short for a commercial jet. Way too short. We can't land there, my co-pilot said. We'll never stop in time. But the voice disagreed. I can do it. I've been practicing. 12 years of practice. I can land this plane. The landing gear deployed. The flaps extended. Everything done with perfect timing, perfect precision. We were on approach now, descending through 3,000 feet. I made a decision. I grabbed the radio one last time. I trust you, I said into the microphone. Not to ATC, to the voice, to whatever was flying this plane. You taught me everything. If you say you can land it, I believe you. Finish your flight. The response came, and for the first time, it didn't sound like me, it sounded like him, my instructor. The way I remembered his voice. Thank you. Keep her steady. We touched down on that impossible runway at exactly the right speed, the right angle, the right everything. The reversers engaged, the brakes locked. We rolled out with maybe 50 feet of runway to spare. The aircraft stopped. Everything went silent. The autopilot disengaged. Control returned to normal. My co-pilot and I sat there in shock, listening to our own breathing. ATC was calling frantically. Flight 447, Denver Center. Do you read? Flight 447? I picked up the radio. This time, it was definitely me speaking. Denver Center, Flight 447, we're down safely. Requesting emergency assistance at our location. They found us 3 hours later. By then, we'd done a full walk around of the aircraft. No damage, no system failures. Everything worked perfectly. The investigators couldn't explain how we'd landed on that strip. The calculations said it was impossible. Too short, too deteriorated. No commercial aircraft could have done it. But we had. Or rather, something using my voice had. They grounded me for 6 months. Psych evaluations, simulator testing, making sure I wasn't losing my mind. My co-pilot quit flying altogether. Last I heard, he's working at a flight school, teaching ground classes. Won't get in a cockpit anymore. I went back to flying eventually. Different routes now. Never that one again. But sometimes, late at night when I'm doing routine calls with ATC, I pause before I transmit. I listen, just to make sure the voice that's about to speak is really mine. Because I learned something that night. Some flights never really end. Some pilots never stop trying to land. And if you listen carefully to the radio chatter in the dead of night, over the most remote parts of the world, you might hear them. Voices making calls. Requesting headings. Asking for clearance. Pilots who never made it home. Still flying. Still trying to complete their final approach. And sometimes, if they need help, they'll borrow your voice to finish what they started. Keep her steady. Have you ever agreed to something without really thinking about it? Just nodded along because it was easier than asking questions? That's what I did when the gate agent asked if I was willing and able to assist in an emergency. Sure, I said. Of course. I'm young, healthy, reasonably strong. I can open a door if something goes wrong. Simple. I should have paid more attention to what I was agreeing to. The flight was packed. International route, JFK to London Heathrow. One of those massive wide-body jets that feels more like a flying hotel than an aircraft. I'd specifically requested the emergency exit row for the extra leg room. 7 hours is a long time to be cramped, and I'm tall enough that my knees usually press into the seat in front of me. So, when they offered 19F, right at the emergency exit, I jumped at it. I boarded early, found my seat, and settled in. The emergency exit door was right there, massive and important looking, with all those warning labels in 3 languages. I did what everyone does, glanced at the safety card, noted where the handle was, then promptly forgot about it, because nothing ever happens, right? These are just precautions. Theater, the illusion of preparedness. The seat next to me filled up. A man, maybe 40, wearing jeans and a gray hoodie. He had the window seat, 19E. I noticed him because he looked so ordinary, completely, utterly unremarkable. The kind of face you'd see in a crowd and forget immediately. Brown hair, average height, no distinguishing features. He sat down, buckled in, and immediately fixed his eyes on the emergency exit door. Just stared at it. Didn't pull out a book or phone. Didn't adjust his seat or ask for a pillow. Just stared. "First time flying?" I asked. Trying to be friendly. He didn't respond. Didn't even blink. Just kept staring at that door. Okay then. Not everyone wants to chat. I pulled out my own phone and started scrolling through downloaded podcasts for the flight. The boarding process continued. The seats around us filled up. The emergency exit row across the aisle, rows 19A, B, and C, were filling up too. I glanced over and felt something cold settle in my stomach. The man in 19A looked exactly like the man next to me. Same face, same hair, same gray hoodie, same blank expression. And he was staring at the emergency exit door on his side, with the same unwavering intensity. I looked back at my row. The man in 19E was still staring. I looked across again. The man in 19A was still staring. They had to be twins. That was the only explanation. Identical twins, who'd somehow ended up on the same flight, in emergency exit rows, on opposite sides of the plane. Weird coincidence, but not impossible. Then the woman took her seat in 19D, right next to me in the middle seat of our row. She had the same face, exact same features, same hair, though hers was pulled back in a ponytail. Same blank expression. She sat down, buckled her seatbelt, and joined the others in staring at the emergency exit door. My heart started hammering. This wasn't possible. 3 people with identical faces don't just randomly end up in the same exit row. This had to be some kind of prank, or a TV show, or the man in 19B sat down. Same face. Then 19C. Same face. I twisted around to look behind me. 2 more passengers were approaching the emergency exit row behind us, rows 20E and 20F. Before they even got close, I knew what I'd see. Same face. Both of them. 6 people. 6 identical faces. All sitting in or near the emergency exit rows. All staring at the doors with that same dead-eyed intensity. I stood up abruptly, knocking my phone onto the floor. A flight attendant was passing by. I grabbed her arm, maybe a little too forcefully. "Excuse me, do you see?" I gestured at the people around me. "Do you see anything unusual about these passengers?" She looked at the row, looked at me, smiled professionally. "Is there a problem with your seat, sir?" These people, they all looked the same, exactly the same. She glanced around again, and I saw confusion flicker across her face. But not the kind of confusion I expected, not recognition of something impossible. Just the confusion of someone dealing with a difficult passenger. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand. Everyone looks different to me. Are you feeling all right? Would you like some water?" "No, I looked at the man next to me, the woman in the middle seat. They were still staring at the door." "You don't see it? They're identical." The flight attendant's smile became more fixed, more concerned. "Sir, I really think you should sit down. We're about to push back from the gate." She moved on before I could argue. I sat down slowly, my mind racing. Was I losing it? Was this some kind of altitude sickness? Before we'd even taken off? A stroke? Hallucination? But no, I could see them. clear as day. 6 identical people, and now that I was looking more carefully, I could see more in the rows around us. 7 identical faces. 8. They weren't all in emergency rows, some were scattered throughout the cabin. But they were all angled toward the exits, all staring with that same terrible focus. The plane pushed back, started taxiing. Normal announcements played. The safety demonstration began. And I watched with new horror as the flight attendant demonstrated the emergency exit procedures. In the unlikely event of an evacuation, passengers seated in emergency exit rows will be asked to open the doors. The identical passengers didn't watch the demonstration. They already knew. I could tell. They knew exactly how those doors worked. We took off. The seatbelt sign turned off. The cabin settled into that mid-flight lull where people start napping, reading, watching movies. Normal. Everything was normal, except for the 8 identical people scattered through the cabin, all maintaining their vigil on the emergency exits. I tried to sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt their presence. That focused attention on the doors. That waiting. Because that's what it felt like. They were waiting for something. About 3 hours into the flight, turbulence hit. Not severe, but enough to wake people up. Enough to make the seatbelt sign ping back on. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. Folks, we're going to be experiencing some moderate chop here. Please return to your seats and keep those seatbelts fastened. That's when all 8 of them moved. Simultaneously, perfectly synchronized. They unbuckled their seatbelts and stood up. The man next to me stood. The woman in the middle seat stood. All 8 of them, rising in perfect unison, turning toward the emergency exit doors. Hey! I grabbed the man's arm. His skin was cold. So cold, it burned. He didn't react, didn't acknowledge me. Just took a step toward the door. All 8 of them were moving now, converging on the emergency exits. The flight attendants were shouting. Passengers were screaming, but the 8 identical figures moved with mechanical precision. They reached the doors, their hands moved to the handles. I lunged forward, grabbed the woman, tried to pull her away from the door. Someone, stop them! They're going to open the doors. A flight attendant was running up the aisle, shouting into a phone. Other passengers had stood up, trying to intervene, but the 8 figures were strong, impossibly strong. They brushed off every attempt to stop them. The man at door 19E, the one who'd been sitting next to me, grabbed the emergency handle. So did the others at their respective doors. They moved in perfect synchronization. They pulled. Nothing happened. The doors didn't open, couldn't open, because at altitude, the pressure differential makes it physically impossible to open those doors. You'd need thousands of pounds of force to overcome the pressure keeping them sealed. But they kept pulling. All 8 of them. Their faces finally showing expression. Strain. Effort. Determination. They pulled until their hands bled. Until their arms shook. Until flight attendants and passengers managed to drag them away from the doors. I watched as they restrained all 8. Watched as the identical faces finally broke their formation, finally showed something other than that blank stare. They looked confused, lost, like they'd woken from a dream and didn't know where they were. The captain made an emergency landing in Iceland. Police boarded, paramedics. The 8 passengers were taken away. I gave a statement to authorities, told them everything I'd seen. They didn't believe me about the identical faces. They showed me security footage from the flight. In the footage, all 8 passengers looked different. 8 completely unique individuals. The authorities suggested maybe I'd had an anxiety attack, panic disorder. They recommended I see a doctor before flying again. But I know what I saw. I watched the footage they showed me, and I could still see it, the same face, repeated 8 times. Everyone else saw different people. I saw the truth. They let me continue to London after a medical evaluation. I insisted I was fine. And I was fine. Physically. But I couldn't stop thinking about those 8 faces. About how they'd all been drawn to the emergency exits. How they'd tried to open them. 2 weeks later, I was doom-scrolling through news articles when I found it. A small piece, barely a paragraph. 8 people from different parts of the world had all died on the same day. The day before my flight, different causes, car accidents, heart attacks, one drowning, but all 8 had died at the exact same moment. I looked up their photos, pulled them from social media, obituaries, news reports. 8 different faces, 8 unique individuals. But I recognized them. Because I'd seen those faces on the plane. I'd seen them identical, interchangeable, focused on one purpose. Whatever had animated those bodies on that flight, whatever had worn those faces, it hadn't been the people who died. It had been something else. Something that knew how to move like them, sit like them, pass for them. Something that wanted those doors open. And it had failed. But only because of physics. Only because pressure and metal and engineering had been stronger than will. I've flown 6 times since then. Every time, I check the emergency exit rows. I look at the faces of the passengers sitting there. And twice, I've seen it again. The same face repeated. Different faces than before, but the pattern is the same. Multiple passengers who look identical to each other, but whom everyone else sees as unique individuals. I've reported it each time. Each time, I'm told I'm imagining things, seeing patterns that don't exist. But I don't get on those flights. I change my booking. I wait for the next plane. Because I know what I'm seeing, and I know that someday, somewhere, one of these attempts will succeed. The pressure will fail, or the door will be weak, or the timing will be right. And whatever is wearing those faces, whatever is trying so desperately to open those emergency exit doors at 35,000 feet, it will finally succeed. I don't know what happens then. I don't want to know. But I'll tell you this. Next time you're in an emergency exit row, look around. Really look at the faces near you. And if you see what I saw, if you see the same face repeated, even once, get off that plane. Make an excuse. Fake, sick. Cause a scene if you have to. Because some passengers aren't passengers at all. They're something else. Something that's been trying for a very long time to open a door that should never be opened. And they're very, very patient. I've been an air crash investigator for 12 years. I've listened to hundreds of cockpit voice recordings. I've heard pilots joking minutes before impact. I've heard screaming. I've heard the horrible silence that comes when everyone knows they're not going to make it. You develop a stomach for it. You have to. It's the only way to do this job. But there's one recording I can't explain. One that shouldn't exist. And the worst part? The flight it supposedly came from landed safely. No incident. No emergency. Nothing. It started as routine quality assurance. We randomly pull black box data from uneventful flights just to make sure the equipment is functioning properly. Standard procedure. I was assigned Flight 2817, Phoenix to Minneapolis. Domestic route. Departed on time, arrived early. Weather was perfect. Not a single passenger complaint filed. The airline's own records listed it as completely unremarkable. I downloaded the cockpit voice recording and started my review at my desk. Poured coffee, opened the file, put on my headphones. Just another Tuesday afternoon. The recording began normally. Pre-flight checklist, radio calls. The captain and first officer had good rapport. You could hear them laughing about something, probably told the same jokes on every flight. They sounded relaxed, professional, everything you want to hear. Taxi, takeoff, standard callouts at rotation and positive rate, nothing unusual. Then, at 23 minutes and 14 seconds into the recording, the captain's voice changed. What the hell is that sound? I sat up straighter. Rewound. Listened again. The timestamp was clear. 23 minutes, 14 seconds. The captain had definitely said that. His voice had tension in it. Concern. The first officer responded. What sound? That banging. You don't hear that? It's coming from below. I increased the volume, listening carefully. There was something. Faint. But there. A rhythmic, metallic banging. Like something heavy hitting the underside of the cabin floor. Slow. Deliberate. Bang. Pause. Bang. Pause. Bang. Could be cargo shifting, the first officer suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. Run a pressurization check on the cargo hold, the captain ordered. I heard the sounds of switches being flipped. Then the first officer's voice, uncertain. Captain, I'm showing a pressure anomaly. Hold 3 is reading lower than it should. How much lower? 0.3 psi. Fluctuating. That wasn't enough to be dangerous. Not enough to trigger any alarms. But it was wrong. And the banging continued. I could hear it more clearly now. Something was hitting the cargo hold ceiling, the floor of the passenger cabin, over and over. The captain keyed the intercom. "Folks, this is your captain. We're experiencing a minor cargo issue. Nothing to be concerned about, but you might hear some unusual sounds for the next few minutes while we sort it out. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Professional, calm, reassuring. But I could hear the uncertainty underneath. The recording continued. The banging got louder, more insistent. The crew was running through procedures, trying to figure out what was loose in the cargo hold. Then I heard something that made my coffee go cold. A flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom from the cabin. "Captain, we have passengers reporting something moving in the cargo hold. They can hear it through the floor. Some are getting scared." "Tell them we're aware of the situation," the captain replied. "Probably just luggage that wasn't secured properly." But that banging didn't sound like luggage. It sounded purposeful, controlled, like something testing the strength of the barrier between the cargo hold and the passenger cabin. At 47 minutes into the flight, the first officer said something that shouldn't be on any routine recording. "Captain, that pressure reading, it's not just fluctuating now, something's equalizing. Like there's an opening somewhere." "An opening to what?" "I don't know. But the air in hold 3 is moving, circulating, like something's breathing down there." Silence. Then the captain, "That's impossible." More banging. Faster now. More urgent. I could hear it clearly through the recording. Bang, 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 bang. Then a sound like metal scraping, like something was trying to pry up the cargo hold ceiling panels. A different flight attendant came on the intercom. Her voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. "Captain, passengers in rows 18 through 22 are reporting the floor is vibrating, and they're hearing voices. Voices coming from below. Like someone's down there." The captain and first officer had a quick, hushed conversation. I could barely make it out. Something about diverting. Emergency protocols. Whether to depressurize the cargo hold. Then the captain made his decision. His voice on the intercom was steady, but I've listened to enough recordings to hear the fear underneath. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be continuing to our destination. I need everyone to remain calm. What you're hearing is a pressurization issue that's creating some acoustic anomalies. There is no one in the cargo hold. There is nothing in the cargo hold except luggage. Please stay in your seats." But the banging continued. For the next 40 minutes, that recording captured something hitting the underside of the passenger cabin. Sometimes rhythmic, sometimes frantic, sometimes in patterns that almost sounded like communication. At one point, maybe an hour into it, a passenger started screaming. I could hear it faintly through the open cockpit door. The flight attendant's voice came back on. "Captain, a woman in row 19 is hysterical. She says something pushed up against the floor under her feet. Like a hand. Like something was trying to get through." "That's impossible," the captain repeated. But he didn't sound certain anymore. The final 40 minutes of the recording were the worst. The banging had developed a pattern. Groups of 3. Bang, bang, bang. Pause. Bang, bang, bang. Pause. Over and over. And underneath it, if you listened carefully with the volume all the way up, you could hear something else. A sound that might have been wind, or might have been breathing, or might have been voices, too distorted to understand, but definitely there. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Just before final approach, everything went quiet. The captain and first officer didn't mention it. They just went through landing procedures like nothing had happened. Touched down, taxied to the gate. Normal. The recording ended. I sat there, headphones still on, my hands shaking. I immediately pulled the flight records, checked passenger complaints, maintenance logs, anything. Nothing. 0 passenger complaints. The flight attendant's reports mentioned nothing unusual. The post-flight inspection found no issues with the cargo hold, no pressure anomalies, no loose cargo, nothing. I called the captain. Asked him about the flight. He remembered it perfectly, because it was completely routine. Smooth flight. No issues. Happy passengers. When I mentioned the recording, he laughed. Said, I must have gotten the wrong file. His flight had been Boring as hell. I checked the recording timestamp against the flight log. They matched perfectly. Same date, same flight number, same departure and arrival times. But the flight log showed 5 hours and 18 minutes total flight time. The recording I'd listened to ran 6 hours and 23 minutes. An hour and 5 minutes longer. I went to my supervisor, told him everything. He listened to the recording himself, turned pale, made some calls. 2 days later, I was told the recording was corrupted. Data from a previous flight had somehow been written over the file. It happens sometimes with older equipment. The file was flagged as unusable and archived. But I'd made a copy, and I've listened to it 17 times now. Each time, I catch something new. A word in those distorted sounds, a pattern in the banging. And each time, I become more certain that whatever was in that cargo hold wasn't luggage. 3 days after I filed my report, I found something in the maintenance records. The aircraft that flew that route had a container flagged for inspection on arrival. It was supposed to be a standard shipment passenger luggage, but the notation said, "Container empty upon inspection." Weight discrepancy noted. Attributed to scale error. The container had registered weight during loading, had been secured in hold 3. But when they opened it after landing, there was nothing inside. Nothing. I started digging deeper. Found that the same aircraft had flown the same route every Tuesday for 2 years. And every 4th Tuesday, there were reports of unusual sounds from the cargo hold. Different crews, different passengers. Same pattern, banging, voices. Something moving where nothing should be able to move. The airline never investigated, just logged it as cargo shifting and moved on. Last week, I was removed from the investigation division, transferred to a desk job. They said I was showing signs of stress, seeing patterns that didn't exist, making connections from corrupted data. But I still have that recording. I've listened to it enough times that I've started to understand the pattern in the banging. It's not random. It's not cargo. It's a rhythm, a communication. And yesterday, I finally isolated one of the distorted voices underneath all that noise. I cleaned it up, filtered it, enhanced it. It was saying something, over and over. One phrase, repeated for 40 minutes straight. Let us out. Not one voice, multiple voices, speaking in unison, begging, pleading. Let us out. I don't know what was in that cargo hold. I don't know where it came from or where it went when they opened the container and found it empty. But I know this. That flight didn't just carry passengers from Phoenix to Minneapolis. It carried something else. Something that wasn't on the manifest. Something that spent 6 hours trying to break through to the passenger cabin. And every Tuesday, on that same route, in that same aircraft, it's still there. Still banging. Still pleading. Still trying to get out. The airline won't acknowledge it. The crews won't talk about it. The recordings get corrupted or lost or archived where no one will find them. But I have my copy, and I'm telling you now. If you ever board a Tuesday flight from Phoenix to Minneapolis on tail number N4387Q, and you're seated in rows 18 through 22, and you feel something push against the floor under your feet, don't ignore it. Don't convince yourself it's cargo shifting or pressure changes or acoustic anomalies, because it's not. It's something that's been trapped down there for years, something that's learned the pattern of the flight, the rhythm of the engines, the sound of footsteps above, and it's still trying to reach you, still trying to get out. Bang, bang, bang. I work the night shift at the Seattle Air Traffic Control Center, have for 9 years. You get used to the darkness, the quiet hours between midnight and dawn when most of the country is asleep and only a handful of red-eye flights cross your screen. It's peaceful, usually, routine. The planes move like clockwork, following their programmed routes, responding to instructions, landing where they're supposed to land. Until the night flight 515 forgot how to come down. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are always the slowest nights. Just a few cargo flights and one passenger red-eye from San Francisco to Seattle, Flight 515, scheduled arrival at 2:47 a.m. I'd handled this flight dozens of times. Same route, same aircraft type, same crew, usually. Nothing ever went wrong. The flight checked in with me at 2:19 a.m., right on schedule. The pilot's voice was crisp, professional. Seattle Center, Flight 515. Level, at flight level 350. Flight 515, Seattle Center, radar contact. Descend and maintain 16,000. Expect vectors for the ILS runway 16 left approach. Descend and maintain 16,000. Flight 515. Standard exchange. I watched the data block on my screen as the altitude readout began to decrease. 35,000 feet. 34,000. 800. 34,600. Normal descent rate. Everything exactly as it should be. Then, at 34,200 feet, the descent stopped. The altitude readout froze. I watched it for 15 seconds, expecting it to update. When it didn't, I keyed my microphone. Flight 515, Seattle Center, I show you level at flight level 342. Confirm you're still descending? No response. Flight 515, Seattle Center, radio check. Nothing. I felt the first flutter of concern. Radio failures happen, but they're rare, and usually, you can still see the aircraft descending on radar even if you can't talk to them. But Flight 515 was just sitting there at 34,200 feet, not descending, not climbing, just holding altitude that wasn't assigned. I tried again. Flight 515. If you read Seattle Center, squawk ident. The transponder code flashed on my screen. They could hear me. They just weren't responding. I watched the flight path. The aircraft had passed the point where it should have started its turn toward the airport. It was continuing straight, maintaining that frozen altitude, heading northwest away from Seattle. Flight 515, Seattle Center, you've passed your descent point. Turn left heading 120 and descend immediately to 16,000 feet. The transponder code flashed again. Acknowledgement. But the aircraft didn't turn, didn't descend, just kept flying straight at 34,200 feet. I called my supervisor over, showed him the screen. He tried hailing the flight. Same result. Transponder acknowledgements, but no voice response. No course change, no descent. Get me their company frequency, he said. I patched through to the airline's operations center. They tried calling the cockpit on the company radio. Nothing. But when they asked the flight to squawk ident, the code flashed. The pilots were there. They were hearing us. They just weren't talking. And they weren't landing. The aircraft completed a wide turn on its own. Not toward the airport. Just a gentle 180. Bringing it back the way it had come. Still at exactly 34,200 feet. It began flying a perfect circle, 10-mile diameter. Like it was in a holding pattern, except no one had told it to hold. Flight 515, Seattle Center. State your intentions. Squawk ident. My supervisor made the call to scramble fighters. When a commercial aircraft stops responding and starts flying in circles, you don't wait to see what happens. 2 F-15 seconds were in the air within 12 minutes, vectored to intercept. I listened to the fighter frequency as they made visual contact. Seattle Center, Sabre Flight has the target in sight. It's a 737. Exterior lights are on. No visible damage. Aircraft appears intact. Sabre Flight, can you see into the cockpit? Negative. Too dark. But the aircraft is maintaining steady flight. No erratic movements. The 737 continued its circle. The fighters followed, matching its path. And I sat there, watching my screen. Watching that altitude readout that hadn't changed in 40 minutes. 34,200 feet. Frozen. Impossible. We tried everything. Emergency frequencies, guard frequency, company radio. Even had the airline send text messages to the cockpit computer system. Every attempt got the same response, squawk ident. They could hear us. They were acknowledging. But they wouldn't talk, and they wouldn't land. 2 hours into this nightmare, one of my colleagues noticed something on the flight plan. Hey, this is weird. The fuel calculation shows they should have landed with 50 minutes of reserve. I checked the time. They'd been in the air for 3 hours now. By all calculations, they should have been critically low on fuel. But the aircraft showed no signs of distress, just kept circling. Steady, unwavering. That impossible altitude readout mocking us with every sweep of the radar. At hour 4, my supervisor's phone rang. The airline CEO. I could hear the shouting, even from across the room, demanding answers we didn't have. Demanding, we forced the plane down, as if we had some magic button that could override whatever was happening up there. The fighters had to return to base to refuel. New fighters took their place. The sun started to rise. Morning shift controllers arrived, stared at my screen in disbelief. The plane that should have landed 6 hours ago was still flying in perfect circles at 34,200 feet. At hour 7, something changed. The altitude readout flickered. 34,200. 34,199. 34,200. 34,201. 34,200. It's fluctuating, I said, leaning closer to the screen. Then, it started descending, finally, slowly. 34,100. 34,000. 33,900. Flight 515 is descending, I announced. Relief flooded through the room. I keyed the mic. Flight 515, Seattle Center. We have you descending. Proceed direct to Seattle. Contact approach on 119.9. Squawk ident. The aircraft turned, smoothly, perfectly, heading directly for Seattle Tacoma International. The descent continued at a normal rate. Everything suddenly looked routine again, like the previous 7 hours hadn't happened. Approach control took over the handoff. The fighters peeled away. I listened as the approach controller guided Flight 515 to final approach. Still, no voice response from the cockpit, just those transponder acknowledgments. But the aircraft was following instructions perfectly. Descending, slowing, configuring for landing. It touched down at 9:14 a.m., 6 hours and 27 minutes after its scheduled arrival time. I watched the data block disappear from my screen as it exited the runway. Felt my shoulders sag with exhaustion and relief. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft on the taxiway. The airline sent their CEO, personally, to meet it. I went home, collapsed into bed, and tried to convince myself it was just some bizarre radio malfunction. Some technical glitch that had trapped the crew in silence while they flew holding patterns for 7 hours. But I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that frozen altitude readout. About the perfect circles. About 7 hours of impossible flight. 3 days later, I got a call from the FAA. They wanted to interview me. Standard procedure. After an incident like this, they said. I went to their office downtown. Sat across from 2 investigators who looked like they hadn't slept since the incident. They asked me to describe everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard. I told them. The frozen altitude, the circles, the lack of voice communication, the fuel that should have run out. Then they told me what the passengers had said. All 147 passengers reported a completely normal flight. Departed San Francisco on time. Smooth flight, no announcements about any problems. Landed in Seattle, maybe a few minutes late, according to most of them. They were confused about why emergency vehicles surrounded the plane. Irritated about being held on board for 2 hours while investigators interviewed the crew. The flight attendants said the same thing. Normal flight, just under 6 hours, nothing unusual. They were baffled by the questions about circles and holding patterns. The pilots were the most insistent. The captain had his flight log. His personal log. Not the company's official record. He showed it to investigators. Takeoff time. 11:47 p.m. Landing time. 5:53 a.m. Flight time. 6 hours, 6 minutes. Perfectly normal for that route with headwinds. The investigators showed him the ATC recordings. 7 hours of transponder acknowledgments. The radar track showing the circles. The fighter intercept reports. He went pale, checked his watch, checked his phone, checked the cockpit clock, then checked the times on every device he could find. According to every clock on the aircraft, the official ship's clock, the pilot's watches, the passengers' phones, the flight had lasted just over 6 hours. Normal, routine. But according to every external system ATC radar, the fighters, ground clocks, tower recordings, the flight had been airborne for 7 hours and 27 minutes. An hour and 21 minutes of time that existed outside the aircraft but not inside it. The investigators pulled the flight data recorder, the black box. It confirmed what the crew and passengers experienced. 6 hours and 6 minutes of flight. Normal descent starting at the appropriate waypoint. No circles, no holding. No 7-hour nightmare. But I was there. I watched that plane on my radar for 7 hours. I tried to talk to them for 7 hours. I watched the sun rise, while they flew in circles at an altitude they shouldn't have been able to maintain. The FAA closed the investigation, attributed it to synchronized equipment malfunction affecting ground-based radar and recording systems. They actually wrote that. Multiple independent radar sites, all malfunctioning in exactly the same way, showing the same impossible data. And somehow, the fighters had been chasing a ghost aircraft, while the real flight, 515, landed normally an hour earlier. The official report says the flight landed at 5:53 a.m. My logs say 9:14 a.m. The difference is 3 hours and 21 minutes, but if you include the time they should have landed 2:47 a.m., it's 6 hours and 27 minutes they were somewhere else. Somewhen else. I've worked a lot of Tuesday night shifts since then. I've handled Flight 515 at least a dozen times. Same route. Same crew sometimes. I hold my breath every time they check in with me. Last Tuesday, they checked in at 2:19 a.m., right on schedule. Started their descent. And I watched that altitude readout like my life depended on it. 34,000 feet, 33,800. Normal. Routine. They landed at 2:51 a.m., 4 minutes late. But here's what keeps me awake. I pulled the passenger manifest from that impossible 7-hour flight. Cross-referenced it with the passengers from last Tuesday. 37 of the same people, same names, same seat assignments, same flight, 6 months apart. I looked at their photos on social media, compared them to security footage from 6 months ago when they boarded that lost flight. Same people, but older, not 6 months older, years older. More gray hair, deeper wrinkles. One passenger had a surgery scar that wasn't there in the earlier footage. They aged. During those hours that didn't exist inside the aircraft, but did exist outside, time moved differently for them. Slower inside, faster outside. Or maybe they went somewhere time works differently altogether. The airline knows. The FAA knows. They buried it. Called it equipment malfunction. Moved on. But I have the recordings. I have the radar data. I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, on certain Tuesday nights, there's a space where aircraft can slip into a different kind of flight, a holding pattern that exists outside normal time. Where 7 hours pass for those watching from the ground, while only 6 hours pass for those in the air. Where people age years in moments they don't remember experiencing. Flight 515 found a way back. Most of them don't even know they were lost. But 37 of those passengers are still flying that route. Still taking that same Tuesday flight. And every time they do, I watch my radar screen and count the minutes and pray they come back the same as when they left. Because, someday, one of these flights won't come back at all. They'll slip into that pattern and stay there, circling forever at 34,200 feet, in a place between seconds, where time doesn't move forward or backward, but sideways into spaces we were never meant to find. And when that happens, I'll be here watching, counting the hours that pass differently for them than for me, watching passengers age while they sleep, watching an aircraft that exists in 2 times at once present for those inside, impossible for those watching from below. That's the truth they won't tell you about flying. Sometimes the plane lands exactly when the pilots think it should. Sometimes your watch says 6 hours, and the ground says 7. Sometimes you walk off a flight with gray hairs you didn't have when you boarded, and memories that don't quite align with the calendar. And sometimes, the flight never really ends at all. It just keeps circling, keeps holding, keeps existing in that space, where time forgot how to count. I hope you never find yourself on one of those flights. But if you do, if your watch stops matching the world around you, if hours disappear between heartbeats, just remember, you might make it back, you might land safely, but you won't come back the same. Time always collects what it's owed, one way or another. If stories like these keep you awake at 35,000 feet, if they make you look twice at the passenger next to you or listen more carefully to those routine announcements, then you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to Verified Whispers, because these 8 flights are just the beginning. There are more stories out there, more warnings, more impossible moments happening right now on flights around the world, and someone needs to tell them. hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications. And the next time you fly, remember everything you've heard tonight. Because the sky isn't as empty as you think. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing about a flight isn't that something goes wrong. It's that everything goes right in ways that shouldn't be possible. Safe travels. And remember, keep your seatbelt fastened, even when the sign is off.